Hello, everyone. I always get a bit embarrassed when you're introduced. You're being introduced to somebody really important, and really, actually, I am privileged to have the job of Chief Executive at Salix, and I work with the most amazing staff that I'm so terribly proud of. So being here today and talking about what we've been doing is really important to me. I just want to tell you a bit about what the purpose of this workshop is that what we've been doing is really trying to think about how do you make the title Investors in People come alive in the way that we run and the way we work within our organizations. Because our relationship with investors and people has been based on really wanting to show that we really do care about investing in our people. And so the context of this discussion is last March, we're just a year away from the anniversary of going into lockdown. We decided to go into lockdown just about a week and a half before the government announced it. And at that stage, our company was getting ready to invest £1.8 billion in energy efficiency and reducing the carbon footprint of the UK. Really worthwhile, important work for the future of our Earth. The minute we went into lockdown, we found out that we lost that funding, so that our staff were, quite stunned by such a quick decision of government. And then 3 months later, we were asked if within a year we could actually invest £1 billion of funding in the public sector to begin part of the recovery, so that in 21-22, lots of jobs were being created in the green industry. When we went into lockdown, there was a lot of thought about how are we going to support and invest in our people during lockdown. We have a practice within our company of yes.
Annie, it's Glenn. Sorry. A few of us are struggling to hear. It is coming in and out. I don't know if you need to sit a bit closer or...
Okay, if I sit a bit closer, does that help? Thumbs up if that's helping.
Yeah, that was really good.
Much better.
Right, yeah. Okay. Okay, so it's just that for myself, as I'm looking at myself, it feels I'm filling the screen, so it's a bit embarrassing, but there you go. I'll carry on. So what we have is we try to do evidence-based practice. And we were thinking about how do we support staff during what we thought was going to be a long haul, given this coronavirus. So I just want to take you through what we did in investing in people as we went into lockdown, and actually we're doing the same as we prepare for what is our recovery plan from lockdown. And we started off by introducing our staff to some of the theory and understanding of what this lockdown, what it actually does to people. And so I have great pleasure in introducing you to Dr. Parasha. And Dr. Parasha will say a little bit about himself. And what we did is we started off telling staff about some of the things that they needed to think about as we were in lockdown. And what you're going to get now is a short presentation that to bring all of our understanding to what is it we need to think about. And I can't see Dr. Parasha on my screen, so I'm just hoping he's there. Dr. Parasha? Oh no. Glenn, has Dr. Parasha come in?
I can't see him, no.
Georgie, can you contact him?
Did you have the link, Glenn?
It's a problem.
Hi, Annie. I think he has the link. I think he's just joining.
Joining, okay.
Give him a minute to join. Yeah.
Can you see the link? Is he being entered, Glenn?
Yeah, we're admitting people in the waiting room still. So actually, we're getting more participants in.
It's events like this that you can see that technology, while it's been marvelous for us, always has its limitations as well. So there's me thinking everything's going to go smoothly, and my anxiety's gone right up in the sky. Thinking, is this going to work? As we're waiting for Dr. Prash, I can say a few things more that I hope people find interesting. So last week we delivered the distribution of the £1 billion, which was an amazing feat. And of course, that investment is going to start rolling out over the UK. We also are funded by the Parliament in Scotland and in Wales. So we are actually a national company and a little company that's hardly known, but we are the major arm of government in reducing the carbon footprint of the public sector. So we're delivering projects in schools, academies, hospitals, and this year, for the first time, we now deliver this projects in central government. And we're working with the Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Culture, delivering projects. I'm hoping to be invited to the SAS site in Wales, but whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But we are doing amazing investments that are really going to showcase what the future looks like for a low carbon Britain. And this stuff matters. It matters. So is Dr. Prash now in? Because otherwise I just get on with stuff that I don't know whether or not it matters to you.
He's in the waiting room. If somebody could let him in.
Could somebody let it, Glenn, could you let him in?
Yeah, that'd be Talika. Thank you, Talika.
Ah, hi.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Prash. It's so nice to see you again. I've just done an introduction to everyone and been explaining what your role has been in really helping the staff of Salix to understand what happens in these circumstances, and explaining that you're going to give a presentation that's going to help everyone's understanding of what we were doing in Salix and how we did it. And I know that everyone is looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much for agreeing to this. And the screen is yours.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit late. I was in another meeting. So I'm going to give a brief presentation on resilience and resilience during the pandemic. It's going to be based on some evidence that's pertinent to the work that I do, because during the pandemic, I've not just been supporting patients, but I've been supporting staff as well. And also thinking about the wider population and how it's going to be affected. So a lot of the talks that I've been doing with Salix has been around the impact that the lockdown has had on just the general population, really. So I'm going to share my screen now, and it's on resilience. That's what I'm going to talk about. I can't see it on my screen. Hang on.
You should be able to share.
Yes. Let me just see where it is. Maybe if I share my desktop, it'll come up. Are you seeing my desktop yet?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I'm just going to share this then. And I'll click this off. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see resilience in a pandemic. Let me just try and move this out of the way. Okay. So what is resilience? Resilience is how people respond to problems. It literally comes from the Latin to mean to spring back or to bounce back. And I first heard about resilience at school when I was learning about it in physics. So resilience is the ability of a material to withstand stress and strain before it breaks. And so what this suggests is that resilience, if you think about it, is dependent on the property of the material, so how bendable it is, and on the property of the stress that you put the material under. And if we were to extrapolate that to human beings, what you would then think of is that there are individual factors that impact upon resilience, but just as important, and in my opinion, more important, are the factors, the contextual and the community and the societal factors that you stress people to. And it depends on both of those things. So I guess resilience describes a person's capacity to cope with changes and challenges and to bounce back during difficult times. The more resilient someone is, the better they are at getting through tough times, and the better their chances of recovering from very difficult things like a global pandemic. So that's what resilience is. What is it not? Resilience is not about staying strong and silent in the face of adversity. It is not a fixed quality. People are resilient in some situations, but not in all situations, because remember, it's a combination of your individual factors as well as the stresses and strains that you put under. And it is not a personality trait. It isn't that you are either resilient or you are not. You know, everyone is resilient to some extent. So I'm just going to take you through some evidence behind how the UK and to an extent other parts of the world have been coping during the pandemic and what that might say about human resilience. So the good news is that most people are coping well with the stresses of the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, has published statistics on the extent of mental well-being in the UK. And its most recent findings, so from a survey carried out just before Christmas, shows that amongst adults, so what they classify as people over the age of 16, about 2/3, 64% of people say they're coping well. And among this group, 17% say they're coping very well, and 47% say they're coping fairly well. This picture of adaptation and resilience should not be surprising, because we know from previous research that individual interpersonal challenges, things like losing your job, losing a loved one, are far more mentally challenging than collective traumas, such as natural disasters. This is at least in part because strong social bonds support people and they protect people against stress. And during a crisis, people often come together to help each other. This creates a sense of belonging and a shared identity with neighbours. This is called the social model of collective resilience. But all people are not the same. Though 2/3 have said that they've coped well in the pandemic, that leaves 1/3 who have said they've not. And what we know is that people seem to split into 5 groups in terms of the effect the pandemic has had on their well-being. This is a graph of the number of anxiety and depression or depressive symptoms people have reported. And so this is a score. The higher the score, the more anxiety and depression symptoms you have. And these are 3 time points: at the beginning of the pandemic, some point in the middle, and most recently. So the higher the score, the more anxious and depressed you are. And so there are 5 classes. The first class, class 1 in the orange, are the vulnerable. These people are already feeling pretty stressed at the start of the pandemic, and the pandemic has worsened this. The second are the chronically ill in the blue. These people had very high levels of distress before the pandemic, and this has been sustained throughout. These are my patients. The third are the adaptive type. So in the grey, so they started off pretty distressed, but their distress has fallen throughout the pandemic. They've found new meaning in the pandemic and the distress has reduced. And the fourth are the deteriorating. In the yellow, they were distressed before the pandemic and they've become a lot worse during it. These people have now become my patients. And finally, you've got the silent majority, the resilient people down here. What could be driving these differences? Don't worry about this very complicated picture. It's just to show that there are lots of factors. People in these different groups started from different positions, and broadly people with a history of mental illness, people who are lonely, people who found uncertainty really difficult to handle, who are prone to worries about their health and dying, and people who felt that they had little control over their lives. These people tended to do poorly. In contrast, people who started out with positive beliefs about the world, they thought the world was fundamentally a good place, often experienced what's been called post-traumatic growth. They used the pandemic as an opportunity to reevaluate their lives and change for the better. So what we can say is that pandemics are dynamic and multifaceted, so that how people react over time depends not only on where they start out, but also on how events unfold. It's important to recognize that some of the consequences of the pandemic have been good. People who have kept their jobs have often saved money. The daily commute, which is very stressful, has been eliminated for some. Most parents of older children have enjoyed having their kids at home, but parents of young children have found it very stressful. And people have used a wide range of strategies to cope. These most often included, so these are again from the ONS, these are the 5 most common strategies that people have used to cope during the pandemic. So look, about 9 out of 10 people use at least one of the strategies that people were asked about. And these are the 5 most common: going for a walk outside, visiting green spaces, and basically staying connected with others. So we know that exercising, for example, boosts mood, and physical fitness is protective for good mental health. Half of the adults who were asked by the ONS had visited a green space as a way of coping. Access to nature, green spaces, open spaces, plants, etc., is crucially important for well-being. Connecting with others, family and friends predominantly, has been very helpful. We know that having positive relationships prevents loneliness. I think it's interesting that family and friends are the people that we have turned to, so about 47% in both cases. And fewer people have used things like peer support or community services or mental health services. Although if you have, so only about 5% have used those kinds of voluntary sector services or the NHS. But if you have a mental health condition, then that figure rises threefold. So about 15% of people with mental health problems have used charities or professional supports to cope. At the same time, some people have used maybe unhelpful ways of coping. So a significant minority have been eating a lot, drunk more alcohol, and a few have taken more illicit drugs as a way of coping during the pandemic. And this has an impact on both mental and physical health. If we were to tie this all together, what does the research suggest? The research suggests that at a population level, it is the economic threats associated with the pandemic that are most linked with mental health symptoms, whereas exposure to the virus seems to have had little effect. Now, this reverses for people who have been hospitalized for COVID, or for people who know family members who've been in hospital because of COVID, or the healthcare workers who are looking after them. In those populations, the severity of the illness has a direct impact on how likely people are to suffer from, frankly, psychiatric syndromes like post-traumatic stress disorder. So, having a more nuanced understanding of the psychological effects of the pandemic has practical implications. These are some of the ways recommended to help people feel more resilient and come out of the pandemic. We're never going to be able to put a psychologist on every street corner, but we can most preserve the population's mental health by protecting people from the economic consequences of the pandemic, and by providing practical support to parents of young children. When there are additional resources for mental health services, they should be directed at those who are most vulnerable. For example, those with pre-existing mental health problems, those who've been hospitalized because of the virus, or frontline workers. We should use community assets like libraries and other community spaces to promote a sense of community, and also invest in providing these online if we can. We should include peer support and befriending schemes targeted at vulnerable people like the elderly. And finally, local authorities should be given additional resources to improve the physical environment, create safe spaces, create green environments for people to access, and we should protect and facilitate access to nature as part of a sustainable well-being economy. You will see that all of my recommendations on how to improve resilience are on what we can do collectively as a society, because as I said at the start, I think that the context and the community in which we work and live has, I think, a bigger impact on our resilience than individual factors. So I'm going to stop screen sharing there. And that was a kind of a whistle-stop tour of the evidence behind things. I don't know. I know that you're going to have a question session later. I don't know whether anyone has any comments or anything right now before I need to go.
I thought that I allowed in the timetable for about sort of just 5 minutes of questions. So there won't be time for a lot of questions, but if we take some of the questions, if you write them down as well, we will get back to you afterwards and give some answers. But are there any questions that people have for Dr. Parashar now?
You were not able to see my screen, were you?
I was able to see it, but I think some people have said that they couldn't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, it might be some people if they're joining on mobiles and stuff. So yeah, if you're happy to share your presentation,
Yeah.
you can send them along with the notes.
So does anybody have a direct question? Could you raise your hand, the little yellow hand that gets raised up, if you have a question for Dr. Parashar, because he won't be with us for too much longer.
I think from our perspective, just to kind of kick off the discussion, for example, in investors, when we started talking about burnout, when we started talking about kind of the support, one of the things that our HR provided us was like a measurement tool on Slack, where you can answer a certain number of questions and it kind of tells you how it feels, how you're feeling on the day, you know, if you're close to burnout and what you could potentially do. And that has been really helpful in kind of feeling what your temperature for the day is like.
Yeah, so there are valid burnout questionnaires that you can use, which kind of, as you say, it measures your temperature as to how you're feeling and so on. The question for me, and this is a question that I've been grappling with, obviously, in the healthcare service, is kind of what we then do for people when they are close to burning out. And actually, I'm working with the British Orthopaedic Association to come up with a position statement on this. And so there are things that you can do at the beginning to try and prevent people from burning out. And then there are things that you can do when people might be showing the first signs of burning out to try and stop it from getting worse. And then there are things you can do when people are burnt out to try and prevent it from recurring and to give people the resources in order to be protective for the future. And it goes through sort of common sense things like all the stuff I was talking about around exercising and looking after your health and connecting with people, etc. at the beginning. But then when people are burning out, sometimes you need more formalized support in place to the point where we think of providing psychological therapy and so on to people who I mean, a lot of NHS staff, as you've probably heard, would be suffering from quite high levels of burnout and stress. So there's a whole range of options that you can use for that.
Dr. Parashar, thank you so much for doing this for everyone. And thank you for sharing the slides, because I think that it really sort of sets in context the next part of the presentation I'm going to be doing. And I'm looking forward for you coming back to Salix again. The staff really love your talks. And it really does stimulate our thinking about resilience, both on a personal level and for Team Salix. So thanks so much. And I'm just going to go on to the next part of the presentation then. See you again soon, Dr. Parashar.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Bye now.
Okay, everyone. So what we heard from Dr. Parashar, if I sort of sum up, is that if we think about the 5 groups of people, those 5 groups of people are represented in different proportions within our organisations. So the first thing we know about the interventions we make as an organisation to invest in our people is one size doesn't fit all. That everyone is coming to the situation in a different circumstance. But the overall aim of what we're trying to achieve is to have as many people in that group that Dr. Parasha explained is the resilient group, the people who are building their resilience, and also for thinking about, well, what about all the others that are all part of the organizations that we work within? So without going into too much detail, we designed a general mental health program for all staff to be involved in. And then we thought about everyone who might be in the groups, those 5 groups, and how do we begin supporting them? And we did many, many things, which some of my staff are now going to talk about, because what I'm interested in is that what happens in lots of organizations is you make interventions and suggestions, but actually we don't do enough about, well, what was the impact of that? What did it feel like? What was the result of us doing that? And so what I've done is I've invited a number of the Salix staff who had different responsibilities during this pandemic and will still have different responsibilities as we come out of the pandemic, because the next talk that Dr. Parasha does is about what is the anxiety and the resilience you need to come out of the situation, as well as what happened when we went into the situation. And that's now part of our future planning. So I'd like to introduce you to one of our managers. His name is Jack Saunders. And Jack manages a very busy team. And I've asked Jack to talk about, well, what did he do as a manager? And what was the impact on staff and the impact on him? Jack.
Thank you, Annie. Hello, everybody. So as Annie said, I'm the manager of one of the teams at Salix Finance, and I look after a team of, lucky enough to look after a team of 7 fantastic people. I suppose to kind of set a bit of context for this, the organisation Salix has grown quite a lot over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. With the schemes that Annie mentioned at the start of the presentation, there's been a lot of growth and a lot of change within the organisation. So not only have we been dealing with a different working environment and things like that, but also a lot of change in terms of business practices, in terms of our processes, how we work with teams, and also, you know, how we can support one another whilst working remotely, rather than all being in the office. So sort of one of the really big challenges as a manager has been, how do I kind of best support my team, and how do I help the team to support one another through this process as well? And we've heard a bit already about how building resilience has been really important, and how kind of really trying to take into account the situation of the individual as well. So one of the things that we were able to do was, by being a bit prepared at the start of the pandemic, we actually moved to a working from home situation in advance of the national lockdowns. And that gave staff the ability to make sure that they were working in the best environment for them. So a lot of our teams went home to live with family and things like that, rather than being sort of left on their own in London or wherever else. So I think that was sort of, you know, one of the things that we tried to do early on is adopt things like, you know, good use of technology, and you know, really kind of early planning to try and help people make decisions that could put them in a good place for sort of starting off on the journey of this pandemic. As we sort of then worked through the process, one of the things that has been really interesting and challenging is how we introduce new people into the organisation. We've been lucky enough to recruit some absolutely fantastic new team members over the past 6 months, really. And how can we sort of bring them in, integrate them into the team, make them feel really supported, and help them to understand what the business is trying to achieve, and what's expected of them, and where the support for them is, and things like that as well. So what we spent a lot of time doing within our team is working to really kind of build that team dynamic up, looking at how we can support one another, how we can work collaboratively on projects, how we can you know, manage resource, manage time over this period. And a key part of my role has been touching base regularly with that team, and with the team and the individuals in that team, and making sure that they've got the support that they need in place in order to be able to do their jobs as effectively as possible. I think the sort of some of the things that we've done on that front have been making sure that we've got the right IT equipment in place. We've offered DSE desk surveys where required as well, to make sure that staff have got a good working environment to work from and are kind of supported in that setting. We've been running sort of induction sessions and training sessions throughout the last 6 months to really bring all of the new people on board and help to kind of build that sense of team, not only within the group that I manage, but also across the organisation, and how we can best support the other teams that we're working with, and how we can kind of work to sort of really build up that sort of resilience in the team and that sense of support in the team. I think to kind of reflect it then back to kind of my experience of the last 3 months, just to kind of round this off, or last sort of year rather, really. It's been kind of fantastic to be so well supported, both from my team sort of working with me, and also from the management within the organisation, to really help identify where our priorities are, what we need to do, and how we can best get to where we need to be at the end of this pandemic period. I think there's been, a lot of change to deal with, and how we deal with change management has been a real challenge, and it's certainly been a thing of huge growth for me. And I think that, the support that we've had from the organisation in putting training in place, in providing feedback. I was lucky enough to have some one-on-one coaching support from Burnham Rosen, which is a group that we work with to support the management within the organisation as well. And those sorts of things have been really helpful to help me kind of develop my skills as a manager, and also put me in the best situation possible to help my team get through what has been quite a kind of challenging period.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you. So I hope that you could hear from what Jack was saying, is that there was both what we were going to do to support managers, what managers were required to do to support their staff, but also individually tailoring support to people in order that we were doing things not just en masse, but thinking about individuals. And this is very important, because we had vulnerable individuals. We had individual staff who had to cancel their weddings 3 times. We had staff who suffered bereavements. So there were other things that we had to take an account of how do you make it available for everyone, but how do you also look at the resources you need for the individual. So I'm pleased also to introduce you to another of our managers, because the managers had a huge responsibility. And this is Heather. Heather manages our Scottish team, and she's done a great job. And she's got some really interesting things to say about what happened with her and how she went about translating what we've heard as the theory into the practice. Heather.
Thanks, Annie. Hello, everybody. So I'm Heather. I manage our Scotland programme and a team. There's 4 of us in our team that manage the Scotland programme. So since the beginning of our working from home period, we've actually had daily catch-ups as a team. So we meet every day, and these were originally to check on just how we were working at home, what we were doing each day, how we were adjusting to working in our bedrooms, dining rooms, living rooms. So that works very well for our small team, just to set actions for the day, and sort of spread out work to make sure everything's manageable, but also to kind of replicate that level of communication that we would have had in an office, to sort of replicate our office working relationship. And this would help to kind of overcome any sense of isolation. And we're all sort of cut off from each other once we were working from home. And when you're in an office, I'm sure a lot of you will almost remember that feeling of just being able to kind of call over to a colleague and ask them a question about work. And suddenly when you're at home, sat behind a computer with nobody else, it's quite isolating, and to know what the answers are. So it's just very keen, and we put a lot of emphasis on making sure that we were in constant communication, just having informal chats, picking up the kind of Teams call, just to check in on work, to make sure that all staff felt supported, but also just to kind of keep that relationship going and replicate what we're used to in our daily working lives. So these calls are still happening today in our team. We catch up on work each day, or what we did in the evening, or the week's football. I'm surprised after a year that we've still got things to talk about, but as ever, our work is still there to discuss and see, sort of set actions as to what we want to do and distribute work to make sure that's manageable for everybody. So yeah, that was kind of one of the main things that we've done, and yeah, we've kept that going on for the last year. One of the other actions that Salix did once our working from home situation became more permanent, and it was kind of apparent that this wasn't just a kind of couple of week sort of change to our working pattern, we developed a recovery plan, which I was involved in developing alongside 2 other colleagues. So we led on this work. And I think the most important thing that we sort of set out at the start of this was to collect all the thoughts and feelings of all staff, of all our teams, to address what should go into the recovery plan and what we need to cover in that. So we address key business areas and key relationships, such as those with our clients, so our public sector clients, their universities, local authorities, NHS trusts, schools, all experiencing very different things in the pandemic, whether that's closures or obviously the hospitals being kind of overwhelmed at the start, and our other stakeholders, as well as funders, and again, importantly, our staff wellbeing. So there were a lot of key areas that we had to address in this recovery plan, and having input from all the staff and teams created a sense of ownership in the work that we did. At the start, we kind of looked at this as a plan as to how we navigate the lockdown period and what could or could not happen, to our business. What can we expect from the next few months? And it helped to set direction and focus for staff, giving them meaningful work, giving them a sense of purpose, keeping them busy, occupied, so contributing to their well-being with that sense of purpose. It also allowed us to plan resources and relationships around the future delivery of this new grant scheme that we're now 6 months into delivering. And this 6 months, it's been a long but enjoyable 6 months now to see where we've come. But by having that plan in place and the input of the teams, and it's not just kind of the operational aspects of what needed to be done and a kind of corporate risk register, it's very much also focused on individuals and how we need to prepare mentally as individuals for the work we're doing, and just the ongoing uncertainty of preparing to be released from lockdown in sort of September time, to then going back into it in November and then again in January. It's really set a clear path. The recovery plan is a live document. We still work on it today, and it's regularly updated with actions that we need to kind of address, and the future, again, keeping that work plan going to get that sense of purpose with staff, but also being able to updating it now and look back at where we've come. We can really celebrate the work that we have done, and I think that shows the resilience that we've been able to kind of pull on in the last year to overcome the challenges of the COVID pandemic, as well as delivering a brand new scheme for Salix and sort of addressing the climate emergency as well as the COVID emergency.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
I mean, I was sitting there listening, Heather, and thinking to myself, what fantastic work focus we gave to people, meaningful work that gave purpose, but also thinking about how this sort of develop resilience. So there's lots of seriousness about work. But if you look at what Dr. Parasha said, is we also had to think about social contact. So I've asked Bernard, who's one of our staff, if he could say a bit about what we did to also address that part of the evidence that needs to be addressed of social contact with one another, and how did we have fun? Bernard.
Yeah, like Annie said, sort of keeping in touch with everyone was really important over the last year, and that sort of collaborative approach and idea sharing has always been important to our success and to people's enjoyment out of their work. So I think there are quite loads of things that we've done over the last year to try and make sure everyone's still keeping in touch, but I just thought I'd run over a couple, and some that I thought were really great. One of my favorites actually was sort of, particularly in the first half of the pandemic, we had sort of regular monthly emails of what everyone's been getting up to, and in their own time, people have been picking up all sorts of new hobbies, or picking up old hobbies, or sending pictures of the books they've been reading, or the cakes they've been baking, or new areas they discovered around their homes, which was really nice, just to have an update of how everyone's getting on alongside of work. And then alongside that, we've had loads of really great workshops organised by Salix on personal development and resilience, as well as well-being workshops. And we had some really good ones from Dr. Parasha at different stages in the pandemic with different focuses, sort of one early on, one sort of maybe after 6 months, and we had one the other day, and always looking at different ideas and what anxieties were being felt by greater society and individuals, and how everyone was in sort of had their own worries and different situations. Then going on to some of the more social things as well. We used to always run sort of charity cake days before the pandemic, and we've done a few on Zoom where people's cakes were judged. Unfortunately, we couldn't taste them, but judged for their aesthetics. And even made a music video. Quite a few staff, including Annie, got involved on making a music video for Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, which was just really fun and good to see people coming together to do something, completely just for the fun of it. And I know something I've noticed in my team and in a lot of teams, they've been getting together, whether it is every fortnight or month, just to have like a social catch up one evening after work, or sort of like celebrating successes sessions to take a step back and really think about what we've done, because it's been especially the last 6 months have been so busy, and just to take a step back and look at what work has been achieved and what everyone's sort of come together to do. And another great thing has been sort of, we've had really regular sort of company-wide staff meetings. We're really trying to have an emphasis on everyone turning their camera on and just getting to see everyone, and some key updates from Annie and other senior managers. And, it really is good to see that we sort of maintained our values of good communication and collaborative working throughout it, and sort of transparency of updates on what's going on and what are the latest developments. So I think, all of those together have worked really well. I mean, those are the key ones that I sort of picked out that worked well at making everyone feel included and sort of still feel like we're all working together to sort of common goals and objectives.
Thanks, Bernie. I have to say that when we approached the staff video of Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, I approached it thinking, I'm going to make my staff laugh. So I did some very ridiculous things, and I think that it's a video that probably we could make some money on showing to people, because it really was good fun, but did some very silly things. And I was robbed in the Christmas jumper competition, but moving on. What we wanted to do is, again, I want to stick to this theme of, as Bernie was saying, so we were also looking at social contact. How do we think about everyone being in a different place without anyone sort of being sort of embarrassed that they were finding it more difficult than others? And managers had to be aware of that. But we're a company that really takes seriously investing in our people, and we were thinking, well, how do you do that during a pandemic? So I thought it would be good to hear from our HR director, Carol Brown, who's going to talk a bit about how we invested in our people and their development during the pandemic. Carol.
Thank you, Annie. Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, my name's Carol Brown, HR Director within Salix. Now, during the lockdown and the first lockdown, we at Salix and the management team was very keen to ensure that none of our staff felt isolated. And you'd have heard from the other speakers the type of things we'd done in-house within their teams. But in addition to that, what we also did was to think about how can we do it in a practical way. So one of the things we did in terms of investing was and recognising that we're about to launch $1 million scheme, was to get staff ready by giving them some extra leave, and to actually say, don't think about work, take time out, refresh yourselves. So they've got additional leave to actually just take time out. in readiness for our September launch. We also thought about people's well-being in terms of exercise, and so they were given contribution for gym membership, wellness in terms of their teeth and hygiene. So if they want to go to the dentist, there was supported in that financially to do that as well. And then in addition to the well-being side, personal well-being, we thought also how important it is that we don't lose sight of the professional and personal development. And you would have heard what some of the colleagues said earlier. So we thought it's really important to ensure that our training and development took place. So during the first pandemic, we encouraged our staff to continue with their CMI qualification, the Chartered Institute of Management qualifications, to also do some personal development. We're really maximising the time so that staff could still get that development and know that they were being invested in, and obviously to deploy that as we went on throughout the year. And as we've said already, also the corporate training. So there was training that we did en masse for everyone. So in terms of leadership, we did a training on by the Mythodrama organisation on Apollo, and looking at the different types of leadership and how people lead, the strengths and weaknesses of different types of leadership, and how that could be deployed in the workplace. And again, within the context of lockdown, how do we ensure we're still supporting and encouraging our staff who are varied with various needs, as you've heard already. And then obviously what we were trying to do is to ensure that while we're doing this, it was very important that people kept sharp. So by having that personal development, so they're at the cutting edge of the latest information, technology, whatever that was in terms of development, but also to keep them optimistic. And for us to make sure that our staff was ready for the future. So doing some future proofing in terms of our development. And again, demonstrating all the way throughout this journey that Salix, our staff matter, and our staff care, we will give the staff care to staff because they're important to us. And obviously if staff are well trained, it means they're ready then to deliver what the next challenge is. Throughout the pandemic, we were also very cognizant that in the latter part of December, there were some late changes by the government. So staff who were planning to go home and spend time with their families, there was a quick halt as those who could travel by train, and we're all aware of the late changes. So we also made sure of checking with staff that no one was going to be left alone, or if they hadn't already thought about bringing food into their home for Christmas. So we did that checking in as well. All these, it sounds small, but it's important. And it's amazing how the staff gave feedback as to how much they valued that checking in from the managers in terms of their well-being and how they were still important during the Christmas period. So again, everything we've done is about thinking about what is required now in terms of the business, for the future, but also in terms of individuals. So staff are very much at the centre of how we do our business here in Salix. And so we continue to invest in their development. That's just a small highlight of what some of the things we've done.
Carol, and what we decided to do when Carol was telling me the sort of things that she wanted to talk about, and what's the evidence that this worked then? And so I'm really proud to introduce you to James, who is a new member of staff, and he's going to tell us about what happened for him and some of his colleagues.
Morning, everyone. I'm James. Thanks very much for the introduction, Annie. So I've been at Salix for some time now as a client support officer, and I was recently given the opportunity to take on some further responsibilities by my manager, Heather, who's already spoken today. And she was really key in kind of offering some really good support and encouragement to kind of take the opportunity with both hands and really make the most of it. And with those additional responsibilities, getting, a great deal of learning from those. And from those new responsibilities, the kind of key question was, how did they make you feel? And they make you feel really valued and trusted by management, which especially when you're working remotely and you're not connected to everyone, it's really important to still maintain that sense of value and, that sense of connection within the team, and that sense that, although the pandemic has put a pause on a lot of things, your time at Salix and your professional and personal development is not one of those things that's going to be paused. And the kind of management support that Heather and others offered was just really key in kind of making a success of that. The other thing it did was it gave me the chance to work with so many different people across the company that I would have never had the opportunity to work with necessarily. And it's been really interesting to find out some of the other company processes, as well as some of the what the kind of challenges and perks of, I suppose, of working in some of the other teams across the company and how they all link together. And so developing my kind of overall understanding of the business has been really helpful to my own work as well. I think everyone's mentioned already kind of regular catch-ups and chats, staying in touch, and just noticing as well when your team might be having a bit of an off day, and just kind of taking the time to have a conversation with them and maybe pick them up if necessary, just by having a chat, as people mentioned, about work, but as well as chatting about things outside of work, because it can be quite isolating. But the key thing is maintaining those connections with each other on a kind of daily basis has been really positive, and it's kind of fostered that sense of community that Salix kind of really encourages, despite the working from home conditions. The other thing I would probably say is, although lockdown has, of course, been challenging, it has provided an opportunity to focus on one's learning. And I think Carol mentioned the CMI qualification, which I, as amongst a number of the other CSOs, have been completing during our time. And it's a great opportunity to kind of do that a bit of extra work that will really see the you'll reap the benefits from much later down the line. But it's been a great opportunity to complete those. And as well, some of that support in terms of the workshops, such as interactive leadership workshops, mythodrama workshops, resilience training, all of that's been really useful in supporting the professional growth of myself and all my colleagues who I've spoken to, during this lockdown period. And it's actually resulted in myself, along with 4 of my colleagues, being promoted in the last week or so. And we're so happy that we've been able to make progress in our careers despite the circumstances.
Thank you so much. Do you know what? I think everybody who's on this call can see why I'm so proud of these staff, what the managers put their minds to in order to support everyone who's very, very different. And what I'd like, there's several people from Salix that have joined it because they wanted to be part of this. And so what I'd like to do now is to open it up to questions from people. And, I may ask members of our staff to say things, because it's not just what the managers say, it's what did people actually experience? What did they feel about it? And at the end of it, how resilient do they feel? Because what I feel proud of is that if we were to do Dr. Parash's graph of where our staff are, I think that without a doubt, everyone has worked on their resilience during this pandemic. So I'd like to thank you for your listening, and I'd like to thank my staff for stepping out and speaking, because, while I have to do this fairly often, for them it's maybe their first experience. So thank you so much to them too for helping do this for investors and people.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you to all of your staff as well. So it's now the Q&A session. So please do type your questions in the chat room if that's what you prefer. Otherwise, if you could use the raise the hand symbol or speak out if you wish. So over to the
Then will you field the questions as I can administer it, whatever,
yes,
so that I can sort of make notes of questions and know whether I should deal with it or whether I should pass it to one of my colleagues.
No problem.
Could I just kick this off just in context, because I have a relationship with Salix, as Annie knows. Is that okay, Glenn?
Yeah.
Yes.
A professional, of course. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm not Glenn James, although that name is there. I'm much better looking than Glenn James. He's next to me. I'm Vincent Dolan. I'm the Investors and People practitioner who supports Salix. And I know Annie Shepherd for quite a number of years as well. So just put some context around this. And I work closely with the organisation and also some of these wonderful people that's on here today. I know the first word I would use about this is the authentic leadership that comes from Annie. And I think that's important in all the organisations we go to. And I can say that, and on my heart with proof, because I know how Annie operates. So this isn't Annie saying, oh yes, I'll provide all this for you and it will happen in the organisation. Now she's on it, she's engaged, it's interactive, and it's real. And I think that's so important. So the whole leadership part of this has not been delegated. It is very much interactive. It's happening. So that's the first thing I would say. And for those of my colleagues who might be here in other organizations, it's important to get that authentic and real leadership. And this didn't happen because of COVID. It was there before. I think COVID, because it was there before, it showed that this resilience was better managed simply because the whole foundations was there before. The other thing I would say about Salix is that, and I think I had IP meetings with just throughout this, as Heather will know, and Holly and Bernard, the rest of you, is lots of organizations sort of said, for God's sake, we have enough going on with the government giving us money to spend on various projects, change in direction. We put all this aside. And of course, as Carol has said, no, what did they do? They upped the game on training, qualifications, working with people, the induction, as James has said. If anything, they got better at it. So nothing was put on the shelf. They just upped the game, coaching and mentoring for people. And there's lots of other things going on in this organization that they didn't mention. All these great, bright young people that are working there, they're working on projects on top of their own work that is seen as development. I know that because I see it on the IP group, there's a diversity group, and there's loads more. So nothing was put on hold in the organisation, the people stuff, if anything, and not because of health and well-being. I know you have all spoken a lot about that. I think the other things that often get left, and now could get left for a year and be picked up, and that is why, of course, that Salix is a gold recognised organisation. I think Annie just went from silver to gold within 2 years. Heather will probably know this as well. And I think platinum might be in the sight over the next year because it's real, it's authentic, it's there. So that's just me from the outside saying this. And I know I do turn up and put in a bit of challenge and ask some strange questions at times, but that's about hopefully adding some value. So that's just a little context there about Salix. Thank you.
Vincent, thank you so much. We don't mind your strange questions. It's always very challenging, but thank you so much because, I'd like to say something about authenticity. It's easy to say the words, but actually, I wake up every day thinking, how lucky am I to have this sort of team Salix I have? Amazing people. But within those amazing people, there have been during the pandemic lots of personal experiences. There have been members of staff who've had bereavements. We had 2 members of staff who caught COVID, and we are in the process of the individual support we give to those members of staff. So, it's not all been motherhood and apple pie. There have been individual members of staff who've, had difficulties. But because we've been able to know them and talk to them and their managers have known about it, our response to those that have been in the most difficulty, has been that we've been able to respond very quickly to support people. So I think we're in a good, I don't want to be overconfident, but I think we're in a good position. And our plan for, as Heather talked about, our plan for post-pandemic, post-recovery is in place.